Nau mai e te whānau ki te Takiwā Kōrero, honoa mai, whakarongo mai, me ako mai. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Kei konei ngā pau mō ngā marae o Whangārei. We have a question that we're going to be going through today, looking at economic stability. That's our kaupapa for today. So I'm going to just ask our lovely wahine over here, Dale. No hea koe, Dale?
Ko huru e ki te maunga, ko whakapara te awa, ko Ngāpuhi te iwi, ko Ngāti hau te hapu, ko whakapara te marae, ko Dale Shelford Van Engelen a hau. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe. Big koe, Janelle, no hea koe.
Janelle Beazley a hau, no mangakahia, but I noho in Whangārei and tātai tu Whangārei Terenga Paraoa Marae.
Tēnā koe, tēnā koe. Well, thank you both for coming together and at this time to share your kōrero. And so we're going to look at some pātai around economic stability. Like, what does economic stability actually mean to you, and what do you think it meant to our tūpuna? So, kei a koe te tuatahi.
Economic stability for me is, in current modern times, I think people think of the economy as just the money and the pūtea and how much you've got to spend on the bills.
Yep.
But when I think about economic stability, I think about my tūpuna Eru Nehua and his wife Te Tāwaka, our tūpuna. And he fought very hard in the Māori land courts to make sure that Ngāti Hau and our whānau at Whakapara retained the ownership of their lands, even in the new Pākehā system. So he was able to secure a piece of land for him, and he allocated to each of his 9 children and a piece of land.
Wow.
And I think he had the foresight to know that this was the way of the future, that the whenua was really important.
Yeah.
When our whānau lived there, it was a pā, and Eru and Te Tāwaka lived on the whenua that the marae is on now, but it wasn't a marae back then, it was a pā. Yeah. And all of the whānau, all of his children, they had gardens, they had kaimara, they had the ngahere, they had the wai, the rivers, the awa, and they were actually central to the well-being of all of the whānau. So there was a community living then, and that was the economic stability, having all of those things around that actually sustained the whānau. Unfortunately, as time went by in the 1950s and 60s, of course there was the urban drift when a lot of the whānau shifted to find work, sold their land. There's only a few of our whānau that have retained their tūpuna land. And in 1913, after Eru died and Te Tāwaka had passed away, their children decided that the whenua that they lived on would be put under native land, and that they would actually bring in a committee to look after it. So they recognised that there was a necessity to have some sort of system in place to look after that whenua for the benefit of all of the uri of Eru and Te Tāwaka. In 1966 it was gazetted as a marae, and from that time on it's always been looked after by the descendants of Eru and Te Tāwaka. By 1960, however, there was buildings on the whenua at that time, a wharenui, hokarere, and some whānau homes. But by the 1960s, a lot of the homes had been taken away, and hokarere was in disrepair, and the gorse had covered the land. Wow. And so very few whānau lived in the area, so there was no economic stability. When the Renaissance came in the 1970s, of course, some of our whānau were very keen activists protesting for the treaty to be honoured. And that actually awakened a lot in my parents' generation, because they had been disconnected from their tikanga, from their language, from their culture. What they didn't get disconnected from, though, was and they didn't understand this, I don't think, were the basics of manaakitanga, aroha, whanaungatanga, because that's what sustained our whānau in those times. So even though they weren't there was always this thing about we must look after that whānau if there wasn't enough
the
values were there. But what they'd lost was the culture. In the 1970s, they stood under these 3 oak trees that stand on our marae, which still stand there. And they made a pact that they were going to rebuild the marae. And
What a vision.
A wonderful vision. Took a long time though.
Yeah.
And they started with a brick shed, you know, a little shed, and then the ablution block, which now is over in the paddock, and everyone goes, oh, when are you going to build the new ablution block? Too dark over there, you know. You know what, those buildings were the beginning of the
So
dream.
what did they do? Like, what did they do to be able to, what was some of the mahi they did?
Yep. What we used to do back in the day, cake stalls, gala days. People would just come and do the mahi. You didn't have to pay people. People would donate things. But there was a huge sense of pride and mana, really, for them to say, we're going to build our marae. And around about the 1980s, of course, then there started to be the work skills programs. And so from that time on, it was like, we'll apply for funding, which was a really good thing.
Ka pai. Well, we'll hold that thought. Tēnā koe. Okay, so me hurihia kia koe, Janelle.
Yeah, well, at Whangārei Terenga Paraoa Marae, you know, we're quite lucky in that Kaka Porowani, he had a vision too, and he his home in Whangārei, which is where the marae is at the moment, stands. His home was a base for people, for our whānau that were coming from out of town, from our rural communities into town, to go to the Māori Land Court, or anybody had to go to the hospital, or the whānau was staying there, so it became a boarding house for our whānau, for our rural whānau. And from there, as time went on, he was also lucky too that he was friends with the mayor way back, and so he bought the land off Frank Bender, and that's how Kaka first got there. And as time went on, I think it was about, after he passed, his whānau decided to leave the land there vested for Māori. So it became a Māori community centre, which also was part of Kaka's vision in bringing our people back into the city and having a building that was breathing and living and those sorts of things. So it was a Māori community centre from about 1957, and then in 1982, fabulous funding. We were lucky in that we had people who were trustees at the marae that were able to tap into some funding, and they were wanting to build a marae. So the sites were either Taika or in Whangārei. So Taika was like 2 k's out of the designated areas. So the Māori Community Centre was then turned into the marae space, because it was a tennis court. There was a tennis court there at one time. So the marae opened in 1982, and then between 1982 and 1993, there was a carving in the tukutuku took place there. So we had trustees of that time that were quite knowledgeable and were able to share that. So we had PEP schemes going way back at that time. And we were lucky that all those people that did the tukutuku panels, they were able to get paid a nominal amount. The carvers, they were paid a nominal amount as well. And then the marae reopened as it stands now, I think it was about 1993. And again, we've been quite lucky in that we've been a marae that's been able to, because we're a rohe-based marae and not a hapu-based marae, our beneficiary pool is quite wide and far, up as far as Waimate and Taumarere in the north, out to Mangakahi and out to the coast and Whangaruru, Taiharuru. So our beneficiary pool is vast and big, and we're lucky in that those rohe areas come and use the marae. So they'll either run, we've got lots of trading programs running down there, te reo programs running. And I think, again, this is all part of Kaka's vision and in keeping that place alive and letting people, I suppose, maybe not monetary, but they're filling up their kete with the mātauranga that's been delivered from the marae. And we're really lucky too in that we've been able to we've had programs like Awanuiarangi have held programs there, Ringata Whai have held programs there, and hopefully in the future the education unit at Ngātiwai will come there as well and deliver programs. So we're all trying to keep it within that vision of mātauranga and that learning. The only downside for us is that our city has grown so much that our space is getting smaller and smaller on that corner, but talking to our exactly.
So when you're thinking about Kaka, because he was pretty business savvy,
Absolutely.
so that in itself was a bit of economic stability. Can you talk a little bit about what he did?
Yeah, well, so he was an entrepreneur. Kaka had the first telephone line from here to there. He had a butcher's shop. He had his own grocery store, and so he had his own bank. People banked with him, so he could see that there was value in I suppose teaching his people that this is the way of the world. This is the way the world was going. Yeah. We've been lucky in that we've tried to keep that vision going, and his family have tried to keep that vision going too, working with the trustees of the marae, working with the beneficiaries of the marae. So I think I think it's amazing, really.
Strategic, eh?
Yes,
and an entrepreneurial.
Absolutely strategic.
So if you think about economic stability, because I heard you say, Dale, that actually it wasn't just about the money, and I've heard you say that you had carvings and a PEP scheme. So who was the kaiwhakairo? Who was the carver that actually did? Because that in itself is a taonga, right? When you have someone amongst your community.
Absolutely. So for us at Whangārei Terenga Paraoa, it was Te Warahi Hitaraka. So he was at the Māori Institute of Arts and Crafts. So he was one of the first carvers, and we're fortunate in that I think our whare was his first whare that he's carved. And I mean, he's gone on to weird and wonderful things with his Hihiawa Cultural Centre. I mean, that is in itself too is a vision that he saw for the marae, and he sees for our people within the Whangārei Rohe, that cultural centre. And we've talked to our beneficiaries about the marae moving in that, and he's really keen that can happen. But of course, the conversation still has to be had again and again with our beneficiaries. But it's now we're looking at the health and safety of our people at the marae of where it is. So we're looking at another site. We'll never lose that site where it is at the moment, but we'll repurpose it. And perhaps we could look at repurposing it for, again, Kaka's vision, to help the homeless, to help, to help people strengthen that. Yeah, absolutely.
And
our tukutuku panels were led by the late Kath Munn and Violet Poe, so stalwarts of the marae with their husbands, with Len Munn. And again, we've been very fortunate they've left that legacy too. This is how things are done, and some of the things that they did then, we still do now, which is, they used to have us down there tacking the mattresses, which we don't do anymore, of course, because mattresses are all rubber, and we used to do the embroidery on the blimmin' pillowcases, so that when the tūpapaku came, their pillowcases all had at the top of they all had to have the embroidery this way and that way, and you lose a few things, but you remember, you reflect back on those things and you think, this is the reason why they were done like that, and this is why we had to do that. But
so what were some of the things that the whānau did at that time to try and raise funds? Because I know of some things that they did.
So way back then, and I think every whānau has been touched by it, housing was run at the marae.
So that's whare whānau?
Yeah. So housing was run at the marae. You'd be sitting there, there'd be rows of people. People would walk past and wonder, what are they doing? People who didn't know housing. So what are they doing? They're sitting there, playing housing, cigarettes galore, smoke billowing out the windows. And so for years, that was a funding option for us. Nowadays, we've gotten a little bit more clever, and we apply for funds.
Yeah.
So every 5 years, I replenish the marae, i.e. the mattresses and that. So I give mattresses away, and then we buy new ones. And I'm often told, well, we should be selling them, and it's like, well, we didn't actually pay for them. We got funding, so let's give it out to our beneficiary marae. So we've been lucky in that.
Awhi mai awhi atu.
Absolutely, and that's helping those marae until they can get back on their feet in whatever way they can. However, as we've come down the track and housey there and smoking, so we're a smoke-free marae. We don't have gambling on the marae anymore. That's, people say, oh, can we run a housey down? No, sorry, because we don't want our people to, we don't want to be seen to be supporting gambling and housey, and then, going onto the ching-ching machines and things like that. So,
good, kaupapa.
Nothing wrong with it. And we try and do the healthy eating, and we're, so we take on board all those things, and beneficiaries bring that to us. So it's like, great, let's try this. And it's just a matter of...
Well, look, I just want to kind of mihi to both of you, because, trying to kohi te pūtea, mo te oranga o te whānau me te marae is huge mahi. And I can sometimes understand that our whānau, actually sometimes we don't understand what it really takes. So if, you're sitting in your seat as a tupuna today and you're looking out in 50, 100 years, what are some of the things that you think you would love to leave as a blueprint or as a pathway for whānau to think about? So you've talked about funding, awesome. Is there anything, and you also talked about, it's not just about funding, it's not just about the pūtea, having the resources of whānau who have the mātauranga, to do the mahi around the marae is economic stability too. That's what I can hear. So, your thoughts for 100 years, 50 years?
We've just done a survey of our whānau, and one of the questions was, what do you want to see on our marae in 50 to 100 years' time? And a lot of the people talked about we want to be able to go back to learn our whakapapa, whanaungatanga, we want to be able to meet our cousins, we want to be able to learn te reo and tikanga Māori. The whenua is really important to us because some of us don't have anywhere to call it, and in fact they talked about Whakapara Marae is our tūranga waiwai, and that's actually been our vision for our people, for those people that are disconnected, that the marae is their tūranga waiwai. And cleaning up the river, making sure that the environment is sustainable, making sure that there's native flora and fauna, the ngahere and things to do, toi Māori. And for our people now, the things that bring them back to the marae are the wānanga that we've had, whakaero, rāranga, tikanga, te reo. We have run an Oscar program to try to teach our children about running a marae. So they actually come to the Oscar program and they learn how to run the kitchen, they learn how to order the food, they have to look after the whare, they have to learn their whakapapa, they have to learn the karakias. And you can tell the marae, the Oscar program kids, when you come to the marae, because they're the ones that run out and clear the tables and they're out the back washing. But out the back, what you hear is laughing and getting to know each other, and that's what a lot of the our adults miss out on. Our kaumātua kuia, when they come to the marae, they just need something to bring them there. We have had a couple of kaumātua kuia groups coming onto the marae and talking about the old days, and what they want to do is actually record their stories so that their mokopuna can hear them, and so that's what we've started to do. Where some of us are writing some books and puka and doing a bit of research, and one of the things that we wanted to put onto the marae is the wharetaonga, to actually bring artefacts there that actually talk about our tupuna, like old Bibles and things like that, and actually tell the stories of those. And so in terms of economic stability, we have to look, how do we do that in a different way? Because we're no longer a pa, and the people, when we did the survey, 50% of our people lived within 50 miles of the marae or in Taitokero. The other 50% lived in other parts of New Zealand, 12% lived in Australia, and there was one that came from overseas. So we've got whānau in America and Engelen and possibly some other places. How do they maintain that connection? And so we need to look at technology to actually help people to learn over the airwaves. So we need to find a good balance of what can we run on the marae, because we asked a question as well. What skills, what time, and how much time do you have to commit to this? Because they had all these wonderful things they wanted to do. Yes. But the answer was, I'm too busy, I live too far away. So the hau kāinga then gets left to do all of this mahi. So you have to have a balance. It's very hard.
Yeah.
So, but what we are focusing on too is cleaning up our river, because we've got so much pollution in our river. The tuna's not there anymore, the kai's not there anymore, the ngahere's not there anymore. So of course you don't have all of that. So our people are going to learn rongoa Māori, whakaero. One of the things that happened is we're actually asking some of our whānau, we're going to start bringing them back. When we built our tomokanga, we ran a wānanga whakaero. And so our people came back and they actually helped to build the tomokanga. The stained glass windows we've got at the marae. One of our whānau was taught to do stained glass windows. She came back, got some funding, and she did the wānanga at the marae so that people could actually come and actually look and see how to make it and actually put their hands to it. So with our development plan, we are starting to look at what can we do at the marae. So we want to carve the whare, we want to dress the whare kai, and we've got artists, we've got kai whakaero, we've got kai rāranga, we've got all of the arts and the people to do it. And so we want to bring those people back so that others of our whānau can come back and actually have a hand and actually make it. Because that's how they will maintain that connection to the whenua, learn their te reo, learn their tikanga. If you don't have something active on the marae, actually they'll never come back and they will not learn what it is. We have got a lot of people who have disconnected, especially our young people. And
mā te wā, ka hoki mai, mā te wā.
So it's a challenge. But one person said in the survey, her vision was that the marae would be a place where her mokopuna could come back to and feel welcome, know that they belong, place their feet on the ground, feel aroha, and know that they stand on the shoulders of their tupuna. And so that will very much make up the vision for our marae in the future.
What a legacy. Awesome.
Yeah.
Kia ora.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome, Dale. And I think rural marae, that can happen, and you can see that vision coming to life. For us being an urban marae, I think one of our biggest things that I'd like to see in 50 or 100 years' time is that the marae is still serving the people, is still serving our people, our rural people, our beneficiaries, our people of Whangārei, in whatever manner that may be. The programs that are run there, I hope that there's programs that are going to be, those programs are still, or some sort of a program is still running. But I think technology is the key. Technology is the key to anything that's happening for our people today. I mean, our young people are just so clever, and I mean, they're going to be our age in that time frame. So it's like, wow, how old are their grandchildren? How are their grandchildren going to be with technology? So, I think it's about the leadership for our marae and our leaders on the marae driving us or steering us down that pathway, and for that, and trying to navigate that journey for us in the future.
One thing about technology, I think, in a tikanga sense, and I've had the question asked. We're starting to Zoom in people to tangihanga, and so the question starts to be asked: is it tikanga? Is that correct practice? How do we do that so that we're not compromising the tikanga of the tangi? And so I think those are the questions that in the future people have to understand. What is the tikanga, and how do we manage that through the airwaves?
Yeah, if we think about economic stability and tikanga, I think that's the key, because for us, economics is not just about pūtea. I've heard you today talk about, it's about the aroha, whakapapa, whenua, leadership, whanaungatanga. That's our economic stability. And but what do you think about te reo?
Just part of breathing, it's part of everything that we do is around the reo, whether it's this amount or this amount, whether you're matatau or whether you're just on that journey too. But it goes hand in hand with anything you do. I mean, just that huimate, if you're going into a huimate on the marae and you don't know anything, by the time 3 days later you've got so much knowledge that you didn't have before that with language, with tikanga, those sorts of things. So for me it's a hand in hand, it does, yeah.
For me, I think that there's so many of our whānau that can't kōrero Māori and they feel very whakamā, they don't understand tikanga, and that actually makes them stay away from the marae, because when they come onto the marae they feel insecure, they feel whakamā, especially our older ones. And I think there's been a renaissance in learning te reo, especially since the government has set up Te Mātāwai, and there's a Māori language plan that is run by Māori for Māori, and I've seen actually a huge increase in the number of people going to learn te reo Māori through the wānanga, wanting to, and they've actually come to us and said, can you run us wānanga, for te reo and tikanga. And so I think in the future, as our younger generations, because they're growing up knowing te reo, knowing tikanga, their school is endorsing and encouraging it, and they're not feeling made to feel, oh, you're Māori and why should we do that? I've seen that changing not only in young people, but even in the places where we work, that te reo Māori now has actually become the in thing to do, and everybody wants to know their whakapapa, and if I'm not Māori, can I still use the whakapapa? And it's like, we talked the other day to someone and they said, my waka is the Qantas ship 345 or something like that, which is great. And so I think more people are coming onto the marae, like we have businesses, and that's where we get our economic stability from those businesses, that we can afford to charge a bit of money to enable to make it cheaper for our own whānau to come in. So it's a balancing act, but I think the more that people feel comfortable about tikanga and te reo Māori, and that they can feel they can stand up with pride on the marae, I think that they will come back to the marae a lot more. I know in our whānau, I think that's what puts a lot of them off.
Well, tuku mihi kia kōrua, we're just closing to getting to the end of our kōrero today around our tipu for Takiwā Kōrero. I know on behalf of your people, I want to thank you, mihi to you both, for your hard work that you do, the aroha that you give, because this is really, really selfless work, and it's all about for our whānau and our marae. E te iwi, if you're sitting at home and you're thinking, how can I support our whānau, our marae, to be sustainable for 100 years, reach out to your whānau, reach out to the people that actually do the mahi on the marae, to not only think about the pūtea to grow the well-being of whānau in the marae, but also about how we actually do this work together. Nō reira, e te whānau, tēnei te mihi kia koutou katoa, karawhiua, economic stability.
How will you be a good ancestor?